So one of the things that folks DM me most about as an offset guitar specialist is for me to release and put out a comprehensive guide to setting up offset guitars. So today we're going to be doing just that and doing a full guide to how to set up a Fender Jaguar. Now the focus of today's video is going to be on vintage style Jaguars. We are going to be going over installing a bridge and setting it up properly, how to calibrate the tremolo, how to adjust the truss rod, how to properly string a guitar. We're also going to be installing a Fender mute onto this thing, and then any other loose ends to dial in a nice, comfortable, low action, mostly buzz-free setup on a Jaguar we are going to be doing today. Before we get started, let's just go over a couple of the things that you are going to want to have on hand to be able to dial in the setup on your Jaguar right. You're not going to need too much, but just a couple of tools that you may or may not already have. Let's go over a couple of the basics. You're definitely going to want a screwdriver, preferably one that ratchets and can change out the little screwdriver bits. You're also likely going to want a drill that's going to help you get a lot of things done quicker, such as removing the neck mounting screws. Ideally, you'll also have a mini screwdriver set. I've got this one from StewMac here. It's awesome because there's a lot of little bits specifically for doing guitar work. But if you do not have that, that's okay, so long as you have bits for your screwdriver that are small enough for things like the pickup height screws, as well as the pick guard screws. Make sure not to use bits that are too big because you're going to end up stripping those screws and then you're going to have more problems to deal with. In addition to those, you are going to need a couple of specialized guitar tools. The first one, which hopefully you already have, is the appropriate size Allen key or hex wrench for the bridge that you are going to be installing. Today, we're going to be putting on the original threaded saddle bridge that came with this guitar, and we have an Imperial Allen key for that. You're also going to want to have some kind of radius gauge. You can either have an over the string radius gauge like this one from Music Nomad, or the under the string type. I actually use both. If you've seen my previous video on must-have guitar tools for doing your own setups at home, I use the over the string kind to quickly dial in the radius of the saddles, and then I will follow up by using the under the string type because you get a more accurate overall radius with this type. Again, you really only need one or the other, but if you have both on hand, that's fantastic. Additionally, in this guide, you're going to need a set of strings. I've got the Gabriel Tenorio JG48 strings. That's his heavy bottom, lighter top set, specifically made for the Jaguar. These help me to avoid having to solder the ball ends of the high E, the B, and the G string, which I typically do if I'm using a set of, say, D'Addario's. Few other things that we're going to need is a string action gauge. So I have got one from StewMac. I also use one that is just a generic one that's got both imperial and metric measurements. You're also likely going to need a capo. The capo just helps, especially on these kinds of models that have the truss rod adjustment at the heel. As we are dialing in the amount of relief necessary, it's handy to have a capo around so that you can put them on your neck and remove the neck without the strings flying off. So yeah, that is definitely needed. And then just a couple more general tools. You'll likely want a set of wire cutters. We're going to use these to cut our strings. A string winder, doesn't need to be fancy. And then I just highly recommend having some type of strobe tuner on hand. If you don't have a strobe one, I guess it's not the end of the world, but strobe tuners like this Peterson Strobo Clip HD really help to accurately dial in you're tuning, especially when you are doing intonation work. The last few things that you're going to need before we get started, it is a good idea, especially if you are working with one of these original threaded saddle bridges, to have a little bottle or a tube of the Loctite thread locker. This is Loctite 222. It is the purple variant, and it's not as intense of a thread locker as the blue variant, which I was using previously. I actually got a recommendation from a lot of folks who had seen my previous videos to use this kind, because you don't have to be as careful with it when you are applying it. It will set, it will make sure that your grubs, like your bridge height grubs and your saddle height grubs, do not rattle, do not come loose, do not lower themselves over time. And so it's definitely, if you do not have this, you could ask potentially a significant other or a family member if they have some clear nail polish that will do the same exact thing. And then lastly, you're going to want to have some type of fretboard lubricant. I use Dr. Duck's Axe Wax. You can use F1 oil, whatever. You don't actually necessarily have to use this at all if your neck is not overly dry. So this is optional. But the last thing that I can recommend that you have on hand is some kind of nut and saddle lubricant. Here I have got Music Nomad Tune It. Now this stuff is fantastic for lubricating the nut slots on this one, because we are going to be setting up the original threaded saddle bridge, to rock. We do not need to apply lubricant to the saddles of this, because we actually do want these strings to catch so that it helps facilitate the rocking back and forth of the bridge. But if you have something that is a stationary or fixed bridge, such as a mastery bridge, a bell rock bridge, then it would be a good idea to put some of this onto the saddles. You can also use Big Ben's nut sauce, and for a low-cost option, even a little tube of Burt's Beeswax lip balm will work to help lubricate both your nut slots as well as your saddle slots. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I am actually going to start off on this one with installing the Jaguar mute. The mute kit comes with the mute spring. It comes with the mute plunger, which is what needs to go inside of the body. So if you have an American Vintage reissue, a Johnny Marr guitar, an AV65, an American Original Jaguar, all of those models have the little hole already pre-drilled for the mute spring and plunger. So what I like to do before I actually put this into the body is I'm going to use this Tune It, the lubricant that I was talking about just before, to spread around the little plunger here. You don't need too much. You can even just spread it out by hand, just like this. And the reason why I do that is because I do not want this thing to catch the walls. Sometimes the fit can be a bit tight. So I just like to lubricate it a bit. And then you are just going to drop that into the hole. Oh, the other thing that you're going to want to have is some kind of chamois or shop towel, paper towels, ideally like microfiber. I've got two different kinds, one that is a bit more textured and a smooth one for cleaning. So now that I have got that in, there are only a few other things left to installing the mute. The first one is obviously the mute plate. Then we've got two screws for mounting the mute, and then we've got the mute foam, and I usually install this thing last. You want this part of the Jaguar plate to be facing your pickups, okay, because that is where the mute foam is going to go. And then we are just going to take our screws, and there are two screw holes on either side of where the bridge thimbles are. And that is where we are going to be screwing our mute into. And I typically like to get both screws in first and then gradually tighten. And what you want here is to have a nice, satisfying click as low as this mute plate can go. And so right now that's fairly good. So we are going to get to the point where it's low enough and still not hard to engage, because that is how the mute is supposed to function, by flipping this little lip on the outer edge. So I'm going to continue to tighten just a little bit, just half turns each, because it seems like we are getting kind of close, and it's still fairly easy to engage. And I'm going to go just a little bit more. And you want to make sure that is level on both sides. You do not want it uneven. And once it starts to become hard to disengage the mute, then we back off just a tiny bit. And I think we are just about there. I might back off just the tiniest bit here, like a quarter turn on each, because it's pretty level. You can see that it is engaging nicely there. So now we've got that installed. The next thing that we are going to put is now our bridge. You are going to have a better idea once the strings go on about how much you're going to need to raise your bridge from here. Okay, I can already tell that the bridge is a little bit too low. You don't want the bridge jumping up when you engage the mute like this. So we're just going to go ahead and raise that a bit. And to raise the bridge, in case this is your first rodeo, we are going to go clockwise on this. And I'm just going to dial it in. I'm going to maybe do a full turn for now. Okay. And at this point, just to save yourself the trouble, if this is a brand new bridge for you, it's never been used before, this would be a good time at the very minimum to apply a little bit of that Loctite purple to the little grubs here, because these kinds of bridges, and even fancier bridges, even premium bridges sometimes, if you can feel that the little grub is wiggling at all on the bridge post, then you likely are going to want to use a bit of that Loctite. And to do that, all you really need to do is to get your little tube. I have this diesel size thing of Loctite, but you're not going to need much. And I'm just going to do a demonstration. I've already Loctited this bridge, but you just need to go on one side, just dripping a little bit of this down the edge, and then thread it back into the bridge. And that's really all you need. And same goes for Mustang bridges. If you've got a Squier, those ones are notorious for having awful tolerances on the bridge posts and saddle grubs. The Japanese ones from the 90s all the way up until now, those ones, sometimes the tolerances are sometimes not great, and you want to apply a little bit of that to prevent the lowering, as I said before, as well as any weird rattles and stuff. Okay, so now when I do this, it's not jumping up as much. I probably could go just a tiny bit higher. So I'm going to go ahead and do another half turn on the bridge. And now it's not really jumping as much. And obviously, once you have strings on here, it's not going to jump at all, because the downward pressure from the strings is going to keep that bridge in place. All right, so stringing up a Jaguar is fairly easy. Just a couple of rules of thumb to follow to ensure best practice. We're going to start off with the low E. And basically for the E, A, and D strings, you're going to want to measure 2 posts away from the post that you are installing on, and then cut. So because I'm installing on the low E in this case, I am going to be cutting at the D post, okay? And then you want to put the string in, guide it down, hold it down with your finger, and then you go ahead and start to tune up. Now, some folks like to stretch these strings as you start to string it, just like a little bit as you go up. I'll just do a little bit, but we're going to do the final string stretching at the end so that we can get through this quickly. Now we're doing the A string. We are going to be cutting at the G post. Same deal. Hold down the string. You want to make sure that the consecutive winds are going below that first wind. Now for this D post, we are going to be cutting at the B, and same thing as before. Now G is the only other one that has a special rule. Some folks don't follow this, but I learned this from one of my luthier pals, John Warren, a while ago. And so with the G, what you want to do is you will pull it up taut up to the G post. Okay, you're going to pinch at the G post and you are going to pull that back to the low E post, and then you're going to cut at the high E post. Okay, and that does give you roughly a little bit more than 2 posts away, because now we have, you know, our plain unwrapped strings here. So we want a little bit more length, but not too much. Some folks just do 2 posts away for all of the strings, but I've been doing this and have had favorable results for a very long time. So as a creature of habit, that's why I do it. All right. Almost there. Just got our B and E left now. Now, as I was saying to you before, typically before I do this, if I'm using a set of D'Addarios or whatever other strings that you like to use that don't have these extra long reinforced winds that the Gabriel Tenorios do to address the common issue of strings breaking at the vibrato, I will typically solder those winds to the ball end. Obviously, that means that you need a soldering iron to do that. It's not absolutely necessary, but I just find that the strings don't break as a result of me doing that, at least not up there. For the plain strings, the B and E, you do not need to cut at all. So just going to go ahead and wind. Last one. And once again, no cutting. And I'm good. And then now what I'm going to do is I am going to seat my strings approximately where I want them to be. Again, that is a thing that you have to do on the original threaded saddle style bridges. You would not have to do this on a mastery or any other kind of bridge that already has slots. And that looks roughly pretty good. And now from here, I can kind of eyeball how much lower I need my bridge to be. And so long again as this is not forcing the bridge upwards, my mute here, then we are still pretty good. And right now the action is looking pretty high. And now to lower it, we're going to want to go counterclockwise. I'm going to go with half turns here and just kind of see. And there is a very high possibility that we may need to shim up the neck to get the kind of action that we want. So again, the next thing that actually we're going to do here first, 2 things. We want to dial in the radius of the saddles. Okay, that's the very first thing. And then from there, what we can do is check to see how the action is at current, what else we need if the action is still too high with the bridge as low as it can go with the mute on. That means that we are going to have to add a shim. And this is also a good time to check to see if you've got potentially any back bow, if you've got too much up bow. Those basically are words to explain whether you have too much or too little relief in the neck. So typically what I like to do to set the radius of a bridge first is just to set the outermost saddles, right, to the height that I want them to be at. Okay. And so I typically will set them to the point where I can't feel the grubs protruding, because then you're going to feel them and they hurt. They cut you. And these feel a little bit loose to me, but we will address those a little bit later. And then from there, I'm going to get a rough radius using my over the string gauge. They recommend that you put this about 6 millimeters away from the saddles. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay. And I've got a 7 1/4 radius neck here. So I'm going to use the 7 1/4 radius side. And based on what I'm seeing here, it's already a perfect 7 1/4, okay? Maybe a tiny bit lower on some. Almost though. It's almost there. So I'm just going to lower just a tad, and then we're going to cross-reference it later on with our under the string radius gauge. What you're looking for is to make sure that the strings are all making contact with the bottom of your radius gauge. So that looks good overall. And then let's just go ahead and take a look. The action is still looking high to me as it is. So we're definitely going to have to shim that neck. But let's go ahead and tune up right now just to see if we are even with the action this high, to see if we're getting any kind of buzzing. I also typically, because I am a guitar tech and I've been doing this a long time, I can typically know whether a neck needs more or less relief just by sighting down the neck. A lot of folks will sight down the neck like this, and that's wrong. You want to be able to look at your neck this way, holding the guitar kind of on its side, and you are looking and comparing the curvature of your fretboard to the straightness of your strings. And I am seeing now that I've got quite a bit of back bow on this neck. Back bow is when the fretboard is curving up towards the strings, and that is going to cause buzzing, fret buzz. You don't want that, okay? From here, what we want to do is to capo our neck because we are going to be removing it. And then I like to, if I'm just going to be removing the neck, what I like to do is to loosen each tuning peg about 6 half turns. So, and that is especially handy when you were already in tune because it helps you more quickly get back into the ballpark of your tuned guitar. Just a little trick that I've been doing for a long time here. And from here, our drill is going to come in handy, and we are going to remove our neck. Now, the way that I like to do this personally is I like to hold a guitar upright like this and supporting both the neck and the body with my hand. And once the screw is loose enough, I will remove it so that it doesn't accidentally fall down and scratch up the body. Okay, like sometimes I will unscrew the rest of it by hand. Now, once you are on the last neck screw, I typically will make sure that I am really supporting that neck plate. Sometimes even these genuine Fender neck plates have little burrs and things on them that will scratch the finish of your guitar if you allow it to, or if you accidentally let it slide down the back of the guitar. Okay, so we're doing two things right now, and I'm actually going to move my neck rest here. We're going to be doing two things. The very first thing that we're doing is going to be adjusting the truss rod. And then the next thing that we are going to do is to add a shim to the inner neck pocket. Okay, so I know that adjusting the truss rod can be scary for a lot of folks, but you shouldn't be scared. The very quick tips for success here. On these types of truss rods, I like to use a flathead screwdriver like so. It just minimizes the risk of you stripping out that truss rod adjustment screw, okay? And then you just want to go a quarter turn at a time because that's quite a lot for you to go. And so in this instance here, because we want more relief, right? Because it's got too little relief right now, I want to go counterclockwise with my screwdriver, okay? So I'm going to go counterclockwise now. One, and then I think just because of how much of a back bow that I saw, I think I'm going to need just a tiny bit more. So I'm going to go like maybe an eighth of a turn more because I have perceived that I'm going to need a little bit more relief than just 1/4 turn. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to put in a neck shim. And so I typically will just cut pieces of cardstock, right? This is about 0.5 millimeters worth of cardstock here. I actually what's hilarious is if you buy genuine Fender parts, right? And they come with these little cardstock cards or like labels. I basically will cut from the top where the little seam is. As you can see, this kind of butterflies out, right? And that leaves you with about, 0.5 millimeters of thickness, which is the perfect size for a shim. And if it's too much, we can always dial it back, cut this thing in half, right? If we only need a little bit. So we're going to do that for now. This is an AV65. I could have sworn these already had angled neck pockets, but who knows? Sometimes they just need a little bit more. And then this one is showing that the body is from August 2nd, 2018. So this may be one of the very final runs of the AV65s before the American original 60s Jaguars took over, or replaced them rather. Okay. So now we're going the reverse, doing the same thing though that we did before. Okay. Taking the neck plate, supporting it as such, and then I will thread these in by hand at first, just like so. And then I'm just going to use my drill on a very low setting and very carefully drill each screw in, right? Easing into it. You're not hearing any loud noises or anything because you're not maxing it out right at the very end there, because I'm going to finish this off by hand, the remounting and tightening of those screws. So yeah, real slow on that final approach. And then you don't want to over tighten. Okay, that is a mistake I feel like a lot of newbies make with their guitars when they start working on them. They think the tighter, the better. We just want it to get to the point where the screw doesn't move anymore, right? It doesn't need to be, you don't need to go crazy. Because also on these lacquer finished instruments, there is a higher possibility that you will end up with a finish crack if you over tighten. So you see how gently I'm going here. Not a lot of torque in my wrists as I'm doing the final tightening. And there we have it. So our neck is pretty high right now. We've got a lot of break angle now. So it's looking like we need to remove one layer of that shim, unfortunately. Because as it stands right now, I can tell kind of the angle is a bit extreme. We don't want that much more height in the bridge. So we're going to go ahead and remove one layer. We only needed like 0.25 millimeters worth of shim after all. And this is a lot of the, this is real. This is what happens. It doesn't happen in one fell swoop when you're doing your own setup. There's a lot of back and forth. And I will advise that in these times, right, when you have to redo something, you might get frustrated. And when you're frustrated and being impatient is the times that I can tell you are when mistakes most commonly happen. And they're usually stupid mistakes too. And I know folks will say there's no such thing as stupid mistakes, but sorry to tell you, there definitely are. There are mistakes that can be avoided if you just approach doing your guitar work or your setups with patience, a cool head. Sometimes you need to step away for a second, right? To minimize the likelihood that you are going to be overzealous, rush something. Those are the kinds of things that you want to avoid, especially if you're fairly new with this and you're getting heated and you're getting frustrated. I know, I can tell you, been doing this a long time. I definitely get heated and frustrated. Okay, when you're removing the neck, again, I didn't mention this the first time, you kind of want to do your best to lift straight up. If you can, be careful if the neck pocket is really, really tight. Okay, and I'm just going to rest that right there. And I'm going to cut, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this shim now in half. Okay, making sure to not include that little seam that was in there because that gives it additional height that I do not need. Okay, and there you go. That's what it looks like. Just one thickness of cardstock. This is about 0.25 or 0.2 millimeters based on the last time I measured one of these things. But it's perfect shimming material, I'll tell you. If you're buying genuine Fender parts, save the little labels. So we can stand to raise that bridge just a bit, okay? Just a bit, okay? And then sometimes if your strings are sitting a little bit too close to the edge and you've already got the proper spacing that you want, you might need to crank the neck either downwards or up towards you. It's reseating the neck. So I just pulled it up a little bit and now the neck is just a little bit more center the way that I want it to be. Okay. And then now I can add a little bit of height back to my bridge. All right, so now we are going to again move in half turns, going clockwise now on the bridge. But overall, we are looking good for nice low action. And let's go ahead and tune it up now and just see where we stand. So we have to take a little break there for a moment because as things sometimes go, unexpectedly, that Johnny Marr neck that was mated with this AV65 body ended up having a frozen truss rod. And unfortunately, the attempts that I made to unfreeze that truss rod, especially because the client was still within the return window, or at least for a partial refund, we decided that the best order of business would be to return that neck for a partial refund and instead use another Jaguar neck. And we are going to be putting this on instead and then completing our setup as previously scheduled. I think the one thing that we are going to do still before we continue this is I'm just going to add a bit of that purple Loctite to all of the grubs on this thing just to mitigate any future potential that these grubs, especially on this American Vintage reissue bridge, will try to lower themselves over time. That is an important step that we're going to very quickly take. I'm going to be using the Loctite purple for that task. It is a low strength one, but gets the job done very well. And I like to use Q-tips. I know some folks say you don't need it. It's a waste of Loctite or whatever, but I got this huge bottle and it was like 13 bucks or whatever. So I don't really care. What I'm trying to avoid is any unnecessary messes. The very first thing that I think I'm going to address is the legs. So I'm just going to unthread the legs to this thing for both of them and apply a little bit of the Loctite 222 purple to each one of the grubs. So I just put a little dab of this stuff and then we will get one coat one side of our post or our height adjustment grubs here. And that should be more than enough to keep that where we want it. Same thing to the other. And then we're going to have to do every single tiny little grub. Again, when you're doing this, you want to be careful not to get this stuff into the hole where your Allen key is going to go. You definitely, even if it's the lower strength stuff, you do not want it getting in there because it's just a pain. It gets gunked up in there. All of a sudden your Allen key is not going to go in. And so, yeah. So now we're going to do all of the little grubs. This is the cost, or this is the price you pay for being an OG. And the tolerances on the American Vintage ones, actually, especially as compared to Japanese ones or Squier, are definitely much better, much better than those. So this is not absolutely necessary, but because this is the first time this client in particular is going to be rocking one of these kinds of bridges, I just want to make sure it's as smooth of an experience for him as possible. And one of the tricks of the trade for these is you want to set these up in such a way that the little grubs aren't actually protruding from the saddles, because you do not want to feel those scraping against your hand if you're palm muting or whatever. It doesn't feel good. You can always rock the bridge cover if you want to be a G about it. I rock that thing sometimes. It looks cool. Any additional chrome really plays into, I feel like, Leo Fender's car inspirations. All right, that seems good. And additionally, I think what I'm also going to do is I am going to add some as well to the saddles. So I'm going to just tighten the saddle. I'm not going to completely remove the saddles, but I'm just going to tighten them a bit and then drip a tiny bit of this onto the end. I could use the Q-tip, but just a tiny bit. I don't need that much here. There we go. There we go. And then we will have that go up, all the way up, and then bring it back down, and then you're good to go. Okay. And we didn't get any too much excess onto the saddles. That's why I have my paper towel here. If you want to be a little more thorough with it, you can have some of your cleaner out at the same time and just wick up some onto a Q-tip to get off any excess that you don't want on there. So yeah, so that's basically that. And I'm not going to bore you guys by doing every single one of these things. It's going to be the same process for every single one. Again, if this is something that you want to not have to think about in the future, this is a slightly meticulous, monotonous kind of task that you unfortunately have to do to ensure that these grubs and things don't lower themselves over time. So we're going to go ahead and finish these up, and then we will come back when it's time to install our bridge. All right, so we are back, and I just wanted to show you very quickly the finished product. You can see that the legs are not wobbling or anything at all. All of these grubs are still fully adjustable, and I cleaned as I went, so we do not really have any of that purple residue hanging around. You don't want that stuff on your strings. And these as well, you can see that nothing is making noise or wobbling on the bridge. So we are ready to install this thing. All right. So we are going to be setting this thing up for a rocking bridge setup along with our mute that we had done before. We are not going to be adding any tape or anything to the legs because we do want it to actually rock. And there we go. But before we do anything else here, we are going to install our mute foam now. We've got enough height on our bridge that this should easily, we can do this fairly easily. So I'm just going to pull the guard to reveal the adhesive and just very carefully, you might need to pull some strings up. Yep. And then you just want to make sure it's seated center. And then you want to check to make sure that it actually is muting all the strings. And it appears to be doing just that. It's not sending the bridge flying now that the bridge is under tension. So we are good to go. Let's go ahead and tune this bad boy up and take a look at dialing in now our action. So that feels pretty good overall. I almost feel like we could make the string spacing just a tiny bit narrower. And then we will check again the radius now with the under the string radius gauge. We're going to bring up the treble side ever so slightly. The entire treble side we're going to bring up just a tiny bit, like a quarter turn there. And then now we are going to use our under the string radius gauge to really dial in that radius now. And I'm not really getting any rock. Everything is exactly as it should have been. Get a little bit closer. Yeah. No, it's good. Actually, I thought there might be tiny tweaks. Sometimes there are, but in this case, there were not. So let's go ahead and just try to narrow the string spacing just a tad. I think it'll make the overall playing experience just that much better. Now, the tricky thing with these original threaded saddle bridges sometimes is the fact that sometimes your string will be sitting right on top of the little grubs and things, and sometimes you don't want that. All right, so that is feeling great, especially after we narrowed it. I feel like the string spacing now is probably a lot closer to that 52 millimeter string spacing. It feels fantastic. And now what we need to do is intonate the guitar. Let's just do it. Oh, like this. That's actually good too. You know, it's funny, the more you work on guitars, you kind of memorize the pattern for how the intonation goes on like a well put together guitar. Sometimes you'll get one with like a wonky cut nut and it will kind of go against those conventions, but that D is good too. Well, I'll be damned. The G is also good. Probably one of these has got to be slightly off, right? Let's play that one. That one seems a tiny bit off. Nope. Well, if you need to change the intonation just for demonstration purposes here, it's pretty easy. If you need to go sharp, right, because your note is too flat at the 12th or the 12th fret harmonic, you want to go counterclockwise with this. So, for example, on our high E saddle here, I would want to go counterclockwise on that to push that saddle to go closer towards the neck or the bridge pickup, let's just say. If you are too sharp and want to go flat, you'll go the reverse. You'll want to go clockwise with your little screwdriver to then bring it further away from the bridge pickup. And that is basically that. We're going to add a little bit of sauce, some lubricant to the nut slots. So we're just applying just a tad of this stuff to each little slot. So from here, we just will wipe off some of that excess schmutz, restretch the strings now And these are the Tenorio strings, so these don't need a ton of stretching. The last thing that we need to do is to set the vibrato. Now, if you are having issues with the tremolo arm being loose inside of that collet, swinging freely, not staying where you leave it, what you're going to want to do is grab yourself a cloth. And this is at least what I'd like to do. You can also do the hammer trick where you get, it's better if you have a table mountable vise. I have one to the left of me here, but I don't feel like unhooking it. And you can put this arm in there into your tabletop mounted vise and then just use a hammer to hammer a little kink at the end of the arm. That's what you want. You can look up, I think Pusheen did a video a while ago covering how to do that version of the trick. But I personally have always done it so that I take a little cloth and wrap it around the end of the vibrato arm like this to protect the finish a bit. And then I will just take a set of large pliers like this, grip forcefully on that bottom end of the vibrato arm. Okay, and this is going to take some muscle here. So if you can't do it, hand it off to your family member or your friend or your significant other, and hopefully they're stronger. But basically what I'm doing is pulling upwards like this, right? I'm pulling this way, this kind of motion, until you feel it give a little. Okay, and from there, you get a little bit, maybe that's a little too much kink put into there, but there you go. You can see now that there is a little bit of a bend to the arm, and that will help for it to catch the walls of the collet better. And once you lube this up, it should have very little friction against the walls of the collet, and you will no longer have that loosey-goosey trem arm. I believe, as I've said to you all before, typically what I'll do is I will dip the end of the vibrato arm into the little thing of Vaseline here, or whatever kind of shop grease you've got, and you pop it in, and then that's it. It doesn't swing freely. It stays where you leave it, right? And we're getting a little bit of noise here, like a little bit of metallic noise, a little squeaking there. So when that happens, you can just get out the old WD-40. I just typically will get in just the little joints here. And then anything in here. And already the majority of that noise has been minimized. Cleaning off the excess you accidentally sprayed. Let's just triple check also to see that the vibrato is calibrated properly. I'm forgetting if we did that before. So right now, when we try to engage the lock, it cannot engage without first depressing the arms. If I turn about a half turn counterclockwise and it does engage without depressing the arm, then I know that I'm where I'm supposed to be. Nope. Nope. Little too much tension, actually. Okay, now we're there. Now we're there. So now we need to tighten up a bit. So it had a little too much tension. All right, that's cool. And then let's check. All right, we're able to engage the lock without depressing. Let's do a 1/2 turn. And it no longer engages. I know now that's where I need to be, and that is perfect. That is how you calibrate the vibrato. It's a little esoteric, but you're trying to find that midpoint between being able to engage the lock without first depressing the arm and not. So there we go. Now, one more thing that we need to set on a Jaguar is the pickup height. And to do that, I typically start off with the neck pickup, and I will play the 12th fretted note on both the low E and the high E, and then I will adjust starting with the neck pickup only. Okay, so you want both, if your setup is traditional, you want both of these switches down so that you've got only your neck pickup engaged. Okay, and then I will play that note and listen to see if it is oscillating. If you're hearing kind of a warbly, tremolo-like effect, then that means that your pickup is way too high. So I'm not really hearing too bad right there. It's usually a very fast warble. So typically I will raise it up until I get to that point and then bring that then back down. Okay. So right now I'm not getting that oscillation. So I will raise the pickup ever so slightly. Okay. And then try again. Still not getting it. Okay. Now I'm starting to hear it. And I don't know if you're going to be able to hear that on camera, but it's undulating a bit, right? It's oscillating. I can feel that note pulsing. So then I just want to back that down ever so slightly. And now I'm no longer really hearing that. And then I'm going to repeat the step then with the high E and check where we're at right now. I'm not really hearing that oscillation yet. So I'm going to raise it. Okay. A little bit more. I kind of hear it a little bit now. Again, it's going to be very hard for you to hear on camera. Here, raising it just a little bit more, I'm hearing it start to oscillate. So I'm going to back that down again. And now I'm no longer hearing it oscillate. Now moving on to the bridge pickup only, okay? I'm going to do the same thing and see let's raise it up a little bit more just to see. A little bit more. It's still not really oscillating. I'm hearing it a tiny bit now, but then I'm just gonna lower that just a tad. Okay, and then same thing with the treble side. Okay, and then from there, I started to hear it oscillate a bit. So then I dropped it back down. And then now what you want to do is adjust them to taste to just see to see if they're balanced, right? So starting again with your neck pickup. And that sounds pretty balanced to me. And you can adjust to taste. The only thing that you need to be aware of when you are setting your pickup heights from here is that you definitely don't want them to be too high if they are oscillating. You want to back them down, because if your pickups are too high, they can mess with your tuning and intonation especially. So definitely watch out for that. So I'm not getting any cracklies with the pots here. Yeah, no cracklies. So I'm not going to have to hit them with the oxit. So the very last thing that we want to check is that we have the appropriate amount of relief. I'm not really getting any buzzes on the fretboard here as of right now, but we are just going to double check with our string action gauge and our capo. So to do this on a Fender, you typically want 0.01 or 10 thousandths of an inch between the top of your 8th fret and the bottom of your low and high E strings after you capo that first fret and depress the last fret. We are checking, and indeed we have got just a tiny bit under 10 thousandths of an inch on the low E, and definitely a little lower than 10 thousandths of an inch on the high E there, which is good. I like to keep the necks fairly straight, as minimal amount of relief as I can get away with without buzzes on the fretboard. And then this is going to set as well over the next 24 hours. Typically, you want it to settle in for a while to see what final adjustments that you need to make. You may need to reduce the amount of relief, or you may need to increase the amount of relief after that setting time, depending. But as of right now, it's pretty good. I think we've succeeded in doing a definitive setup on this here Jaguar. I hope it was helpful for you all, especially if you have been looking for a definitive guide to setting one of these things up. As we had said from the top, a lot of the principles here apply to other types of models of Jags, so long as they have the rocking style bridges on these, and the vintage vibrato placement, because the more modern ones that do have the vibratos pushed up or have a tune-o-matic bridge need to be treated differently, and so that's going to be a different guide. A lot of these principles also apply to setting up Jazz Masters, so until I have that guide out, hopefully this one will help you out in a pinch. There's a lot of things that the two models have in common, and the approaches between the two are very, very similar. But anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you do setups on your own Jaguars? And if you have any special tips and tricks that you'd love to share with other Jaguar players, that would be awesome, and would definitely welcome them down in the comments below. As always, if you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell to be notified of new videos as soon as they drop. And don't forget to follow Totally Wired Guitars for more offset guitars setup tips.